Hello and welcome to Explain Like I'm 5, where we're making it easy for you, explaining crypto concepts in simple terms. My name is Jessica, and on today's show we have Colin Pape, CEO of Presearch. And this video we're going to be covering the topic of decentralization. Now, as you guys know, Google has dominated the online scene for the past 20 years, to the point the phrase Google it has become part of our regular vocabulary. But how do decentralized search engines help people like you and me? Well, before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Now, Colin, jumping straight in, decentralized search engines does sound pretty technical. So can you help us? What is the point and objective of it?
Yeah, it is definitely technical, and it might be interesting to try to explain it like I'm 5, but essentially the current search model, it's almost like there's kind of a king behind the scenes that is making decisions that affect all of us, and we're almost treated similar to subjects. We really have no ability to actually set the rules or to know really how things work. It's essentially just that we get a set of rules to follow and a kingdom that we get to work within. With a decentralized search engine, it's a lot more like a community. And so we have different people that are establishing their own sets of rules, people that are able to influence the direction of the search engine to say, hey, this maybe isn't providing the best results. When I'm looking for things like this, I think they should be more like this. And then enabling other people who might think like them to vote and say, yes, that's a great way to do it. And we can then enable actually multiple different ways. So instead of Google, for instance, that we sometimes say is like vanilla search, with Presearch there could be 31 flavors. There could be chocolate, there could be strawberry, many different flavors that might appeal to different types of people, because ultimately we don't all love vanilla.
And this is a really interesting analogy there, and I like that it's kind of the king, because as we know, and for me in particular, and I think for a lot of our viewers that are watching, for me the internet is Google and Google is the internet, and it's really hard to distinguish between the two. So the sentence decentralization, how would you explain that? And then versus centralization, what's another good analogy we can use?
I think from a centralization standpoint, and many people don't like being told exactly what to do. They want to have some type of influence, some type of choice, and certainly some type of ability to understand why their options are the way they are. With most of today's centralized big tech platforms, they are making all these decisions behind closed doors. So you can think that they're in some type of boardroom, and they're saying, hey, this is how we think it should be for these people. Here are the two options that they get. Versus the decentralized model, it's not a boardroom, it's more like a town hall. And so you have people that are there. If somebody has a good idea, it doesn't really matter who they are. It doesn't matter what their background is or what their qualification is. If they're willing to raise their hand and say, hey, have we thought about this? Then they can participate in the process and help to shape the nature of the service and how it works. And what that provides is kind of the ability for people to have some type of influence and to have multiple different ways that you can do something, rather than one that kind of gets sent down to you. It's an opportunity for people to say, hey, what about this? It's a better way to do it. And if it is, and other people within the community say, hey, that's a great idea, then that idea rises to the top.
And just to focus on that a little bit more, because I think that's a really interesting analogy, that we're so used to a typical business structure where you'll have the person in charge and then a few managers overlooking, and then it will go through to people that are, if you think about it in a shop floor, for example, the people that are serving the customers forward facing might actually have a better insights to those that are sitting in the top floor in the office that don't actually get to see the inner working. This level playing field where everyone has an equal voice actually just gives a lot more opportunities for kind of success when it comes to the management. Now, we focused on Google, and I think Google is such an interesting part of the conversation, but for me, the internet is Google, social media, for example, Facebook and Instagram, social messaging sites is WhatsApp, and these have so much more power than even kind of government and governance. So for us as adults, if there was this shift to decentralization on social sites, how would it be different for us as users?
I think one of the big differences with decentralized social platforms or search platforms is the integration of a blockchain token. It's a way to align all of the different people who are involved in that system. So you have a team, you have people who are kind of crowdfunding or helping to provide capital to get something going. You have users, you have people who are developers and building. And the way that it works currently for Facebook, for instance, is that there's a venture capitalist that has a certain set of goals. Those goals are to make lots of money. And so they kind of set the ground rules for even the founding team, where they have to have an objective of basically an exit, a way to sell the company for money or somehow get more money than what was put into it. And sometimes those objectives are not aligned with the actual users. So on Facebook, for instance, we see tons and tons of ads, and we have these ways that they're pushing out content that makes people almost addicted. And so they're constantly trying to refresh it because that enables them to see more ads. That might not be actually the best thing for the users. It might be better to have a social network that is more oriented around you realizing your human potential somehow. And so with a decentralized model that has a token involved, everybody within the project is aligned around this same unit of value. And so if everybody's doing everything to their utmost potential, then the value of that unit or that token increases. Whereas in another system, it might be that, hey, the more ads we can get out, the more addicted we can get people, the more money we're going to make, and then the more that the venture capitalists are going to win, but not necessarily the users. And so it's really a way to just align people's values and ensure that we're all basically rowing in the same direction, rather than, in this other model where some people are rowing in one direction, others are in another direction, and then other people don't even realize they're in a boat. So to me, this is a really exciting opportunity to get everybody in who searches. We all search. It's the number one activity on the internet. If we can build a system that returns value to the users and enables them to actually participate in the ecosystem and have a stake in that ecosystem, they have more incentive to utilize it, and they have more incentive to help improve it. So it's a really exciting opportunity.
It is, and you said something there which was some people don't even realize they're on the boat, and I think that is such a good example for people don't realize you're customers of these social media platforms, and if there is a more competition on the market as well, you can work out which kind of sites have a better user experience, better regulations when it comes to your data, for example. All of these factors that you as a customer should be more aware of and should be more aware of the choices that you're making. If we go back to the business side of things now, if we look at how to even kick off a decentralized organization from the ground, I think this is something that is really hard to comprehend. How would you found a decentralized organization? How would it run daily? If there was internal questions when it comes to business operations, how would people decide what the right way to move forward is?
That is one of the biggest challenges, and I think also you need to realize that it's a big challenge, and that it maybe right from day one will not start that way. So I think of Bitcoin, for instance. Bitcoin is the number one currency from a decentralization standpoint. So now here we are more than 10 years in, and it's decentralized. But in the early days, you had Satoshi, you had, the early, cypherpunks who were helping to build this service. And it might have been 2 or 3 people that were trying to keep a server running, or 2 or 3 people that were trying to, make a key decision that is then ultimately going to influence the nature of the currency for forever, such as having 21 million Bitcoin. That was a decision that somebody made. We are no longer able to make that decision. It's one that's been made for us, and it's just the ground rules. And so in the early days, I think it's about having people who are willing to really put their vision out there. And it's not so much necessarily about decision making, it's about setting the tone, and setting the tone of openness, setting the tone of decentralization, and enabling other people to then kind of jump in and start contributing. With Presearch, for instance, our lead web developer started off as just an active community member. He was somebody who then became a Telegram moderator, and then started building things that we didn't even know we wanted or needed. He said, "Hey, what about this?" And it was really good, and the community liked it. And so he ended up becoming more influential and having the ability to steer how the whole system works and what it looks like. And it's not necessarily us telling him. He's taking initiative, he's putting it out there, and he's got to rally support around it. And that's the big difference between a corporate entity where you have these investors behind the scenes, you have generally a founder who is planning to run this forever, or to have to be kicked out or bought out, versus a model where you have somebody who is willing to give up control almost right from the start to whoever has the best ideas.
And I'm sure you've worked in centralized organizations before this one. Out of interest, how much more efficient would you say a decentralized running community is compared to the previous?
Way more efficient. It's unbelievable. We don't, for instance, create job descriptions. We do with Presearch. We do not hire externally. We generate support within the community around something, and people bubble up. And the amazing thing about that is that they are generally the most passionate people, the people who are going to need the least management. They are self-driven, and they are the ones who are going to take initiative and figure out ways to get things done that other people could not come up with. And so what we have is extreme efficiency. With Presearch, for instance, we have a dozen people versus Google that has tens of thousands working on search. And we have the ability to really kind of punch above our weight because of this decentralized organization, which enables thousands and thousands of people to contribute, but not to be reliant on any single person.
And I think there's a few kind of points there to add. One is that you mentioned censorship there, and you've mentioned how we don't really realize how centralized the internet is. And also right now, internet and phone and being able to communicate with different countries and people in the outside world is a freedom of speech to a certain extent. And yes, one issue that popped up a lot last year was, for example, internet shutdowns in different countries, 29 countries in 2021, 155 internet shutdowns, which I think for us in the Western world find it really hard to comprehend. But without being able to communicate to journalists or people outside, that's a huge issue. Could decentralization help with this problem?
There are no gatekeepers. There's no ability for somebody to stop a message from going through. Ultimately, it is running on open code, and it's being done in a way that if it's not at a code level, it's at a community level. So, for instance, certain projects, if they tried to censor their users, and the users then went into their community channels like Telegram and started complaining that they were being censored, It is a way to hold the project accountable. And ultimately, the project is the sum of their community. And if their community is being fractured, or if they are losing community members because they're making bad decisions, including censorship or limiting free speech, then their community is going to dwindle, and ultimately the value of the project will decrease. That's a little different than with the centralized systems. Just because they're so big, it's so hard. You would have to have 1 million or 10 million or even 100 million people try to really raise an objection in order to really be heard and to have any kind of change made within a system like Facebook that has 2 billion users. And it's very hard to get 100 million people together to do the same thing, versus on a smaller decentralized service, it might only take 5 or 10 key members within a community to really make change. So I think that's one of the big differences. It happens in search a lot. There's a lot of censorship. There's a lot of that like, just, I don't know what you guys know about, but with us, but how Presearch originally started. I have another company called ShopCity.com. And in 2011, woke up one day and all of our sites, we had a whole network of sites with, like, you know, the city of Palo Alto and Menlo Park and Mountain View. It was like shopmountainview.com, shoppaloalto.com. And all of a sudden we woke up and all of our sites, it didn't matter if you searched for them by brand name, they were on page 8 of Google. And we were like, what is going on? And we couldn't figure out why it had been demoted, and there was no way to get through with anybody. We spent like almost a month, and we had all these high-level partnerships, and we ended up through the press putting enough pressure on Google. There was a lawyer, Gary Reback, the guy who broke up Microsoft with Windows and Internet Explorer. He was doing an FTC investigation into Google. We reached out to him. He ended up getting us some press coverage that got Google to admit for the first time that they actually assessed manual penalties, which is what had happened to us. Somebody had gone in and said, oh, yeah, this is going down. And it was not algorithmic. And they ended up out of this. We kind of got free from their penalty box. We got them to admit in print for the first time that they did manual penalties. They ended up building out a whole section within Google Webmaster Tools, the Manual Action Resolution Center. And it was something that nobody knew and they did not admit was actually happening. And so that happens times 10 now, and they're a little bit more public about it, but there's a lot of agendas that get promoted, and so yeah, we're trying to ultimately kind of expose those and enable the community to overcome them. The quote that I had was that the most dangerous man is a man with nothing to lose. They had taken away all of the things that we had to lose. Well, our sites are on page 8. We got nothing to lose anymore. If they would have put us on page 2, then we would have been like, oh man, we don't want to get off of page 2. Then we'll be really screwed. Well, they put us on page 8, and it was like, you know what? Screw you guys. There's nothing left that you can do to us. So we went I was on a phone call with Gabriel Stricker, who was the head of global PR with Google, and he was trying to bullshit me and say, oh, this is what it is. And I'm literally like, Gabriel, that's bullshit, man. And you know it. There is no way that it is what you say it is. And I spoke to this guy in a way where he was like, oh God. Well, I get off the phone and we have this live chat thing on our sites so people can ask questions. But part of the thing that it did is that it showed you which IPs and which people were on your site. Within an hour of that phone call, Google in Washington, D.C., Google in Germany, Google in London, England, Google friggin' everywhere. All these people descended on the site. We scared them into the point where they had to respond. And then we put so much pressure on them through the press because they tried to blackball it. The guy that ended up writing that first article, he had to push so hard on his publisher because they did not want to stand up to Google because they were scared that they wouldn't get any Google news anymore. And so he pushed as hard as he could and got it through. And as soon as we had one through and they knew one was going to press with or without them, they better be quoted in something, they ended up saying this, oh, well, it was because of a manual action. And then that set the whole thing in motion for it to be, resolved and unraveled and exposed. And so ultimately, if any of these platforms end up like going all the way with us or with others, they end up putting you in that position, and then you can really challenge them. It's almost liberating.
Well, thank you so much for your insights today, and thank you all so much for watching. I'm now going to pass the challenge on to you. Share this with a family member or friend, or just anyone that's looking to learn more about this industry. And if you do have any more questions, you can always ask Alex in the description box below. And don't forget to subscribe to not miss any more content like this.